Hi there. So in a couple of days I have to do a presentation on creative blocks and procrastination pertaining specifically to creativity. As a side effect or a side benefit, strategies to overcome procrastination can also help artists and writers and other creative people get over creative blocks. So let's look at creative endeavors. And if you're looking at this video and you are a creative person, or I don't really think that this really needs to be about, for this channel, I don't think this needs to be about creativity per se, even though my talk is going to be about that. You know Paul Vanderklay's rough draft for Sundays. This is a rough draft for this talk I'm going to give. So this is addressing creative people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, directed towards creative people. So this has to do with pretty much anything that you want to do that you procrastinate about, or that you can't get the ideas, you can't get the freshness to move on with your project. So we've been talking about meaning a lot these days. So we're going to assume that whatever you're doing, let's say your creative endeavor, is meaningful. And I don't mean to dismiss, sometimes we get into things because we want to rise, or one of the reasons we might get into something creative is because we want to rise up the hierarchy of competence. We also might want to make money doing this, and these are there's motivating factors in here, biological and social, primarily social, and they're definitely variables that should not be considered beneath you or immoral. They're natural. And so let me just give an example myself. I would like to take what I learned from this project on Pirsig and potentially create a modality that that's kind of streamlined, that can help people using what I learned from doing this channel. Potentially I could make money from it. Potentially I could increase my visibility as a therapist. But these are secondary. If my primary motivation for doing this, or if your primary motivation for doing the thing that you purport to love to do isn't meaning, if it is for status, or if it is for money primarily, that's going to fizzle out pretty fast. So let me just say that my primary motivation for doing this channel, if it wasn't the meaning I've discovered in Pirsig's work to help me understand the universe and to live a quality existence, this project would soon turn into a dull chore. So if you're not doing what you're doing primarily because it's meaningful, then you need to reevaluate what you're doing, and therapy can help, and we're not going to address that here. So just be honest with yourself. Is this what you really want to do? Is it meaningful? Okay, let's say the answer is yes. So we're coming at this from the perspective that your creative endeavors are first and foremost meaningful. So let's get on with it. Robert Pirsig addresses some of the barriers to connecting, with quality, to being with what you are doing in the moment. Upcoming in chapter 26, and that Chautauqua is referred to as the gumption Chautauqua. And I don't want to go into it too much because I actually want to explore that fully when we get to that in the reading video. It's so good, I don't want to spoil it. I want to ease into it. So let me just explain to you briefly what the gumption Chautauqua is about. It's the one place in the book that really gives actual tips on how to stay connected with what you're doing with quality. And, there's tips throughout the book and reflections and that kind of thing, but this really condenses it. It's in chapter 26. Gumption for Pirsig is something like John Vervaeke's flow state, and I've made a comparison to that before. So being in that state is directly being linked with quality. Quality is informing every single second of what you're doing, and this includes So one thing that Pirsig addresses is looking through your thought process, when you get stuck and stuff, and being very honest with yourself. Are you being impatient? He has tips on how to deal with that. Is there too much ego involved with what you're doing? Are you holding on to a narrative about about what you're doing? Do you have certain values that you're holding on to, and you can't relinquish those values to see things afresh and move on with what you're doing by reevaluating what you're doing? These are traps. These are gumption traps. Another concept he addresses is stuckness, which is not being able to move forward with his, just being at a standstill. And stuckness happened for a long period of time for him with that lateral drift that we talked about, where he didn't know what to do next, so he drifted laterally, and the lateral drift took him into the army for 2 years, for one thing. So a lateral drift stuckness can last a long time, and that's not being able to move forward, not being able to get creative inspiration. But Pirsig said that's a good place to be, because if you sit with it, if you are in the stuckness state long enough, if you don't fight it, invariably something will come, and when it does, it will be fresh. So you have to be very patient with stuckness. Sometimes in Pirsig's 4-hour writing sessions, which were from 2 to 6 a.m. in the morning, there would be nothing. So 4 hours, getting up at 2 in the morning for nothing, basically is what it seemed like. But it's not a failure. Sometimes those 4 hours were total flow state. So my tips for overcoming procrastination are based on several sources, including Pirsig's work, but a lot of personal experience too. And I'm just some self-disclosure here. For a while in therapy, this was my main problem. So I've really worked through this a lot. And I haven't entirely integrated, like I said, I haven't integrated the Gumption Chautauqua into this material yet, because I don't really want to get into all that before I really address it in the reading series. It's very meaningful for me to present these videos at this point, somewhat along the lines of how the book is actually going in the reading videos. And for whatever reason, that's just how I want to do it. I know, like, before I was doing the reading videos, I looked at a whole bunch of different things, but now I kind of want to stick to ideas that are emerging as the chapters go along. So during the course of any given day, I might have insights and ideas pertaining to this project, and I'll jot them down on a piece of paper or I have a lot of composition books that I use. Lately, of course, I've been using the index cards because I'm trying to this is the writing style of Pirsig and Lila. He puts like discrete ideas, each one on an index card, and that way he can shuffle them around, and so he can have a dynamic system of writing, and I see a lot of utility in that. So that's how I'm doing it now. For some reason, at night, sometimes in bed, I'll get some of the best ideas, so that requires mustering some discipline to turn on the light and grab the pen and write it down on a card. So I keep a lot of cards by my bedside, and that hasn't been integrated into these tips, but I think it's a good one. But that being said, when I'm actually ready to sit down and write, when I have a project to do, to pull it all together, there's a part, a sub-personality, I guess you could call it, that emerges with a vengeance and just takes over, and that sub-personality is called procrastination. So under the spell of procrastination, I have a sudden urge to do anything but work. And one thing I often do, one thing that I'm inclined to do, I really fight this, and we're going to get into this, is look at the internet, go down a rabbit hole. So, but what is it about this task of sitting down to work that is so damn painful that you have to distract yourself with something mindless? And how do you switch out of this state? So the sensation, like when I sit down to do something, the sensation of this procrastination, this sense of procrastination, it's almost physical. It holds you back from what you need to be doing for the greater good. And it's dead set on keeping you away from what you're doing. And in me, procrastination is characterized by this daunting feeling of futility that sets in when I get an idea to work on my project. As well, and there's also a desire for instant gratification. It's if this part is telling me that the hard work I'm considering embarking on isn't going to result in anything anyway, so why not just enjoy myself? So it's this, like, the feeling of the daunting feeling along with the desire for instant gratification. It's a lethal mix, and that, I think, characterizes this sense of procrastination. And I found that speaking to other people about this, the same kind of embodied feeling of this duality is there. I also think that many of us who want to create content, to produce art, start a business, work on your business, work on your writing, is kind of quashed by what we know, with all these videos of famous people and all the great stuff they do, and then we see, just the sheer productivity of these people, like. Jordan Peterson had this Q&A where he said, well, I get up early and I work nonstop as hard as I can for 16 hours and then I collapse. So who's going to be able to do that? So Elon Musk, who arguably is the most productive person on the planet, also works continuously and needs less sleep than the average person. He needs about 6 hours of sleep. And I've heard tell that some insanely productive people need as little as 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night. So that's very hard to compete with too, and a lot of people biologically cannot. So since we don't live, we have to kind of admit that most of us don't live in this super productive paradigm. And this admission is realistic, as most of us are never going to be Elon Musk, but that doesn't mean we can't be productive and create things of significance and beauty in their own right, only in ways that we individually can create. And there's a great thing that Neil Gaiman said, which said, don't compare yourself to other people because only you can create the thing that you can create. And that's very true. And maybe even what we will create will help someone, will make someone else's life better, and ultimately improve the world. But to do this, that means you must overcome the negative state of mind that besets you when you embark on something that requires you to be actively involved in the difficulty of creating something. So it's it's very seductive, rather than know that you're going to be in that daunting state where you're making an incremental move on your project, to just engage in the vicarious thrill of passively experiencing the inner world of Elon Musk on YouTube. Just go to instant gratification. So you need a plan to gently put procrastination aside for a period of time. And in the spirit of us all contributing to the self and world improvement project, I'm going to share some strategies that have worked for me and that come from other people who know what they're doing. So number one is schedule a block of time. There's no way out of this, I don't think. This is something that anyone who gives productivity advice is going to tell you. You have to schedule a block of time, and I would say every day. And there's a reason for this. It's because it works. So come into this with the idea that you got to do that, as if it's part of your job. So Graham Greene, one of the 20th century most notable authors, would work religiously from 8 to 12 and then take the rest of the day off. Robert Pirsig got up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., and wrote on Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance till 6. And you can hear a little bit about that in his NPR interview from 1974. It's on YouTube. I'll put a link to that. Many great writers had set routines for writing. So there's no question that a routine is necessary, which for practical purposes can manifest as a set block of time. But how much time? Well, it's been said that 3 hours a day is the maximum you can really concentrate on something. And look at Pirsig and Graham Greene. They did something like that. They did 4 hours. And that's the longest you can concentrate on something and still be productive. Otherwise, it's diminishing returns. So that's heartening, because that can relieve you, that can be liberating, because that means that if you have this daunting notion that you have to work 8 hours a day on something, those excessive, those extra hours are not going to make you more virtuous. So when you already know that the 3 hours is optimal, that's pretty good. So give yourself even more of a break. Give yourself 1 hour a day that you can devote to your creative endeavor. And most of us can manage this. An hour isn't that long. Then perhaps and sometimes if you've got a full-time job, an hour is all you've got in a day. But you can find an hour a day if you have a full-time job. 90% of us can. There's going to be some people who can't, but 90% of us can. And maybe you can do those optimal 3 hours on the weekends. So think of those slots as necessary parts of your day and schedule them on your calendar. Now here's the thing. During that hour or 3 hours or whatever it is, you might be stuck the whole time. You may not write or draw or create a lick in that hour, and that's stuckness, and that's what Pierce calls stuckness. It's part of the process. It's built in. It's not failure. It's a message that your unconscious is not quite ready to give you something. So just let your unconscious work on it if you have to stare at the page for an hour. So number 2, and this is so critically important, and we hate this, you have to change your relationship with social media and the internet. In a recent NPR podcast, author Cal Newport indicated that in order to be truly productive and to do as both of his books recommend, both of his books on this particular topic recommend, is you have to restructure your relationship with the online world. So do you remember those Facebook whistleblowers after they left Facebook and they came on the talk shows and they said, well, this is how we made Facebook so addictive. Nowadays, every app uses these addictive components, and there are notices every moment on our phone. There are, notices from every app we've got. So we can go to the app and look at their ads and so they can gather data. So be extremely aware that the digital world is both designed from top down and bottom up to be addictive, or it's designed to be addictive as a framework, and the addictive qualities kind of emerge from the bottom up because that framework is in place. So I'm going to link to Cal Newport's talk on social media in the description. He's written 2 books, Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. That was 2016. And he just wrote a book called Digital Minimalism, Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World, and that's 2019. He's turning out, I guess, kind of to be the voice of this movement to eschew social media as much as possible, because we're dragging our feet, but we know that we're going to have to do this. So the TED Talk I'm going to link to is material from his first book, and he's got several tips and counter arguments about the importance of social media, several tips on how to dispense with it to some degree, and also counter arguments as to some of our beliefs of the importance of social media. It's a lot less important than you think it is. The takeaways is that social media, of course, is a huge time suck. It's designed to be addictive, and this is the important thing, it fragments your attention. And the fragmentation of attention means that you can't get into that flow state that you need. You lose your gumption, or you don't even engage with gumption. You don't engage with quality. You can't get to that place where you have that relationship with what you're doing. You have to, every time you're fragmented, the fragmentation prevents you from ever getting into that state. And every time you look at your phone, you have to regroup, and that's a waste of time, because you sort of have to start, you're in that state, then you look at your phone, and then you get out of that state and you have to start all over again and regroup, and you've lost a lot of critical time, you've lost, and you're not in the state that you need to be. So that fragmentation is a really big deal. So there are 2 neurotransmitters associated with positive emotion, dopamine and serotonin. And dopamine is associated with the powerful pleasure of instant gratification, and serotonin with the long-term satisfaction and with peace of mind. So right now I'm going to draw on the work of Dr. Robert Lustig, who was the researcher who discovered the crack-like addictive quality of sugar. And Dr. Lustig states that behavior that yields instant gratification, whether it's eating candy or scrolling through Instagram, he didn't say that, but he talked about the candy, but scrolling through Instagram is the same thing. It cultivates an increasing desire for those small hits of dopamine. It really is like crack. It really is like methamphetamine, so that you want more and more, and that they don't do this that they did. And the reason this happens is because the more dopamine you're constantly putting in your system, serotonin itself decreases. So that makes you less capable of being satisfied in the long term. And this is a neurochemical description of the danger of fragmentation. So that means that you absolutely have to make a commitment to devote that hour or whatever it is that you schedule to being unplugged. You have to, Newport says, you must treat your attention with respect. Don't fragment it. Put your phone in the other room. Put your computer on airplane mode. Do not access the internet for an hour. It's just an hour. You can do it. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you'll get used to it. He says a couple of weeks and you'll get used to it. Okay, number 3, use active imagination. So the great psychologist Carl Jung forced himself to sit alone in his office for 2 hours a day in the dark, I think it was, and just allow his imagination to run wild. And the result of many years of this regular practice was an unreal, unbelievable masterpiece called The Red Book. And here's a picture from it. And his dedication to this block of time to just be with his unconscious and whatever it spontaneously generated. And he was specifically looking for images because he was working on, his own inner world of archetypes and the relationships of his own psyche. After several years, the work that resulted was of unparalleled psychological depth and beauty. So just sit there in front of whatever medium you're using, whether it's a canvas, whether it's your notebook, whether it's the screen in airplane mode. And rather than becoming frustrated with lack of creativity, just sit there with your mind and let your unconscious take over. Keep the project in mind, but don't distress if your mind wanders a bit. If you have the goal in mind, Neil Gaiman said, the mountain is you have a mountain in the distance, but it's kind of unfocused, but it's still there. The mountain metaphor we use used a lot in Zen of the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance in a kind of different way. But Neil Gaiman says you're going towards the mountain. It's kind of a goal, but we can't really see it clearly, but it's always there. So if you have that mountain, have faith that your unconscious will help you. If you give it some leeway, it's going to help you go towards the mountain. Or maybe it's going to direct you towards a different mountain that you didn't know you were looking for, that you didn't know you wanted to climb. Okay, number 4, have a related side project. Say you're really stuck. Your frustration or your blankness is simply too impenetrable. It's just making you too anxious. So good antidote is to pursue a fairly rote or even mindless task that has to be done pertaining to your project, so that the aggravation of having to produce ideas, so the stuckness is temporarily assuaged. So this is a chance, during this hour, if you can't do the creative work, do a little of the admin work. So a good strategy for me to use during my scheduled time is making notes from a book I need to read and digest for the project anyway. Other examples of segueing into related projects, say you're working on something artistic, would be to sketch out related images, or if you're a musician, practice scales, practice a song you're otherwise trying to master rather than, working on your composition. Or you could organize your paperwork. Like I could go through my note cards and look at them and review them, organize them. You just do a little fine-tuning or editing. Say you're doing a video, you work on some of the admin stuff. This is sort of, this is when the other two, when the active imagination fails, because really this time you're using for creativity, but it's better than nothing, because it solves 2 problems. One, if the frustration is causing you too much anxiety, you're actually using your schedule. If you're faced with that blank, whatever it is, blank surface, blank mind, blank sheet, you're actually using your scheduled time in a way in service to the project. And the other thing it does, and this is really important because it's a typical procrastination maneuver, it keeps you from filling that gap with those oh so familiar distractions you rationalize as being productive, such as pairing your socks, doing the dishes, or cleaning up your room. There's a time and place for cleaning up your room. It isn't now. Okay, so number 5, subschedule a break. Depending how long you plan to work, schedule a midway break. If you're working longer an hour, working longer than an hour, like I'd say every 30 minutes or 45 minutes, give yourself 5 minutes to unwind, do a few reps with hand weights or run up and down the stairs, play with your cat, anything but getting on the internet. Don't get too involved in anything. Definitely, nothing electronic. Don't go down the rabbit hole. Do something physical, I'd say, is the best thing to do. Give yourself a chance to regroup. Get a cup of coffee. That's Pierce's favorite thing to do. Get a cup of coffee. He's always advising that. And then return at least partially refreshed. Okay, number 6 is to build in rewards. So giving a reward engages our basic instincts for something pleasurable at the end of a period of difficulty. Graham Greene, who I previously mentioned, like I said, he'd finish his work at noon and then he'd spend the afternoon lunching with friends. Now he had a bit of an advantage. He was already a successful writer, so he didn't have to go back to his day job or anything. But that's what he did. 4 hours of sheer concentration and then the afternoon socializing and conversation. And some of this conversation, of course, would prep his unconscious for the writing the next day. In his case, now remember, this was the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It involved a lot of daiquiris. And so obviously I don't recommend alcohol as a reward, but I do recommend scheduling something fun. Have a romantic interlude. Why not? Take a walk in the park. Have a healthy snack. Or if you have a regular practice and you're really into your meditation, have a meditation session, which brings me to number 7, which is, of course, meditation. So Pirsig said to have a high-quality relationship with your endeavors, creative or otherwise, you had to come at them with peace of mind. And Pirsig, maybe not at the time he wrote Zen, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but he was already inclined towards meditation. In fact, he might have been doing it at that time. But he certainly was aware of the value of it, and he said you have to come at these endeavors with peace of mind. So I continually recommend meditation with my clients, and there's a reason. This is a practice that both will decrease the occurrence of negative emotion bubbling to the surface, including that blank, daunting, depressive feeling of futility that we were addressing at the beginning of this video, and it also increases your capacity for concentration. All creative souls should have a meditation practice of some sort, so get in the habit of this. Start with 5 minutes. Use an app like Headspace, although what I really all you need to do to meditate is close your eyes, pay attention to your breath, and if a thought comes, acknowledge it, and then let it go back to your breath. Meditation isn't about success, it's about getting yourself to recognize that your thoughts, that you've directed your attention away from your breath and redirecting it. It's in that redirecting that all the work is. You don't have to be some kind of sage or a master of this. You don't have to have a blank mind for an hour. Don't worry about that stuff. The success of meditation is in the practice of letting go of those thoughts and getting back to your breath. So you can incorporate meditation in the breaks or as a reward if you're so inclined, and there's a lot of support for this. There's no end of resources for developing a meditation practice. I don't even need to put any links. You're gonna find them. There's also robust evidence to its positive benefit across all domains of life. So there you have it. There's 7 ways to tackle this substantial and mostly universal state called procrastination. And surely there's countless additions to this list, but these tend to work for me. So this video is based on a blog I wrote on my therapy website last year, and I'm going to include a copy of the original article on my Quality Existence website, which I'm sorry, I've really, really neglected that website, and I apologize for this, but I'm going to put that article there so you can just link to it, and I'll put a link in the description. The article is slightly different. It's more from a parts perspective, which is a big deal for me in the therapy work I do. But it adds a level of complexity that's not going to work for the presentation I'm going to do in a few days, and I don't think it's going to work for this video either. I'd really have to, I'm trying to do this more piercing and less parts. So anyway, I hope these tips help you overcome procrastination, and you can let me know if they've helped you, and I hope that made sense, and I will see you next time.